and it just feels like it is an attempt to respond to the call for no new net officers, and it confuses the situation, I think.
And that's Seattle City Council member Lisa Herbold responding to a last-minute move by the Seattle City Council to change its budgeting plan for the Seattle Police Department. She said it was confusing, and she's not entirely wrong there. But this is why we're here, folks. This is why you listen to this podcast. We're going to help make this police budgeting plan a lot less confusing. We're going to cover affordable housing. We might even have an answer for why Seattleites have so much trouble driving in the rain. We're going to cover as much as we can here, all here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are my own. Joining me, the international man of mystery known as Kevin Schofield from Seattle City Council Insight. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, how you doing, Brian?
I'm good. Good to see you in this post-Thanksgiving torpor here as we work our way through this weekend here. Thanks to you, Kevin. Thanks also to Sid Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. That's the coffee stand on the first floor of City Hall, closed during the pandemic. Please do support them online. And a huge thanks to our patrons who continue to support us on Patreon. This podcast takes a lot of time and effort. I'm not going to lie about that. We really need you. If you would please consider helping, even a few bucks a month would be great. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. And finally, thank you to Converge Media for airing the video version of this podcast in the coveted time slot of Wednesday night at 6. We're going to get things going here with Right Here, Right Now. Okay, a lot to reflect on this week after Thanksgiving, and we're going to talk about the budget in a little bit. But the Seattle City Council has some other issues to tackle here in December. The council saying, okay, we have something on the docket this week, a mobile home park development moratorium extension. I'm going to break down a little bit of the history here, Kevin. The council is basically saying, okay, we have 2 known mobile home parks in the city up in North Seattle. And before anyone makes a decision to change the zoning, build more housing on those sites, for example, let's take another 6 months to figure out a plan. There are a number of elderly, low-income people living in these mobile home parks. You don't want to displace them. There's some other concerns, too. And Kevin, I'm looking at this. Voting on a moratorium might just seem like a check done type of a thing on the docket for the Seattle City Council here. But this would be the 3rd time the council has voted on this extension. We're talking about legislation the council passed in January of 2019, almost 2 years ago now. What's going on here?
Yeah, so originally, you may recall, this is something that Councilmember Sawant brought forth because it looked like the Halcyon Mobile Home Park, one of these 2 that are left in all of Seattle, was about to be sold, and it looked like it could be redeveloped into a larger housing complex. There's about 75 mobile homes or so at Halcyon,
right?
And so they put in place an emergency moratorium on redevelopment of this. While they looked at legislation to create, possibly a new kind of zone in the city for mobile home parks,
right?
Like that. Something that sort of would restrict the use.
Yeah.
And they extended that by 6 months. Like you said, this would be the third, twice already. This would be the 3rd time they did it. In the meantime, the mobile home park was sold, but it was sold to an organization that wanted to continue it on as a mobile home park. So there is no sort of immediate threat that it will get redeveloped and these people will lose their homes.
Right.
But in the meantime, I've been doing some research on this, and the mayor's office actually has no interest in passing legislation at this point. So it's going to come back to basically Councilmember Strauss, Councilmember Juarez.
Yeah, they're behind it now.
Up and running with this now because it's in Juarez's district, and land use is legislation and Strauss's thing.
And just quickly on that one, the mayor returned this bill unsigned in February of 2019, just to add that little piece here. So definitely some friction on the mayor's side here. Keep going, Kevin.
Well, and the mayor is an attorney, right? And she knows that there's a one big concern on this, which is because there are only 2 of these mobile home parks in all of the city. If you pass new zoning that only applies to them, you're effectively doing what's called a spot zone, right? Which is a zoning change to specifically affect, 1 or 2, very small, very specific things, right? And that the courts have found over and over again that is largely illegal. Right. So at this point, I've made inquiries into Councilmember Strauss's office and Juarez's office about what they're contemplating for what.
How do you do it?
And Strauss said a couple weeks ago that that he really believes that this will be the last extension, that they're going to get this legislation out in early 2021.
Okay.
But, how they come up with something that isn't a spot zone is beyond me.
Well, take it next level, though. Is there a way to potentially create some development that would work in these situations, such that, and I guess it would kind of sweep the whole concept of mobile home parks under the carpet here, but is there a way to create some sort of package here where these sites do get developed? We have some more affordable housing here, which is really the bottom line, and these people don't get displaced, because that displacement piece feels like the most important part of this equation to me.
Yeah, and the answer is almost certainly no.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with the way mobile home parks work, right? Where the occupant of a particular site owns the home,
right,
but rents the underneath land
space, right? Okay.
And calling them mobile homes is really a misnomer, because they are almost never mobile.
They roll there and they stay there. Yep.
They get plumbed, they get electrical wiring put in, and sewer connections and all that, and they're basically immovable from that point. And some of them have been in place for decades and decades and have changed hands several times, and it just you really could not move them anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So at this point, if it was redeveloped, the folks who own the homes in that place would lose essentially all the value.
Right.
There is a state program to recompense them at some level for this, but it's just these have just turned out to be complicated messes.
Yeah,
they are interesting affordable housing, because the rent for one of the the sites that one of these homes sits on is could be as low as like $75 a month.
Wow,
it's actually pretty low.
Right.
But again, they're stuck there. They're stuck in this deal that they really can't get out of.
Right. It's one of these debates, Kevin, over existing affordable housing that I know the council is engaged with over the past several years. This one's a little different because of the mobile home park example, but it feels like one of those situations. I know Councilmember Herbold's talked about this a lot, this idea of trying to preserve that existing affordable housing, because sometimes when these new developments come in, a lot of people do get displaced, and the whole concept of having affordable housing just gets wiped away. I feel like that's a piece of this too.
It is, although these are sites where the city has not put any money into developing affordable housing. Right, so they're basically by going in and putting a new kind of zoning on top of this, they're forcing something to continue to be affordable housing, by putting requirements on a private property owner.
Yeah, right.
And where at the moment this particular area is zoned for residential or commercial.
Yeah, right.
So they're, and in fact, during the MHA rezoning, they changed the zoning of these sites. Right. So then to immediately turn around and say, no, we're going to rezone something else seems very weird.
Yeah. Wow. I can't wait to see the piece you're going to put together on that, Kevin. That's going to be a very interesting bit. There's a lot going on with that too. I wanted to talk about another thing that's on the docket for the council this week, coming up here for the Parks Commission, an economic bailout for the Seattle Rep Theater on the campus, of course, of Seattle Center. Some more history here. The theater used to be in a playhouse built for the 1962 World's Fair. Then the current facility, where the Rep is now, was built with help from a bond measure back in 1977. So over the years, the theater has had several different contracts with the city. Now it's on one of these deals with a $1 a month rent setup, but also has to make certain days free for city use. The theater has also been paying into a trust fund to make sure it has enough money for renovations and repair. But COVID has presented a whole new challenge here. The Rep schedule, like so many other theaters in town, canceled, basically indefinitely, and they need that trust fund money just to cover operating expenses. Kevin, I wanted to talk about this because it appears the Rep looks like it might have enough funding to cover expenses through June of 2022. What do you make of what the city is trying to do here?
Yeah, I think this is very similar in a lot of ways to what the city has done with many other facilities that it owns and rents out to nonprofits, to a wide variety, small business and things like that. They've tried wherever possible to reduce property tax payments, reduce rent payments. Seattle Center has been doing this kind of across the board. And it's devastated the Seattle Center budget, right? Because
absolutely.
They, their maintenance and security and all that stuff is all very dependent upon those rents. But on the other hand, it's been trying to work hard to both, Seattle Center and the city, the larger city organization, have been trying to keep these organizations afloat. So this is the case where, as you mentioned, there's this ongoing fund that that the Seattle Rep is supposed to pay in, and the city pays in too, to cover just ongoing major maintenance and minor maintenance, and upgrades to equipment upgrades to the theater itself that the Seattle Rep has been occupying. And so what this amendment of the contract would do is say for the next 2 years they don't have to make their annual payments into that, which will save them several $100,000. And that fund is restricted at the moment to these kinds of major maintenance and equipment upgrade kind of expenses. And the amendment also says that the Seattle Rep would be able to basically borrow money from this fund to pay for operations, but eventually has to pay that money back in.
Yep. And I know this is a situation where the city's trying to reach out in a way to help out this organization, but I think it really underscores the challenges of so many businesses that rely on large crowds getting together to operate. I mean, this is something where you've got this situation, you've got different stadiums, whatever else. I feel like more stories like this are going to start to come out as, you can only last so many months in a pandemic like this. And here we are just about at the year mark dealing with COVID. And I just wonder if more agencies, more different operations like the Seattle Rep are going to be reaching out to try to get some help from the city.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, until we have a vaccine in place and this really starts to subside, these issues are just going to continue to come up.
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually working on a story right now with the Seattle Channel about Arts West Theater, which is creating some new virtual performances there. So make sure you check that out on Seattle Channel coming up here shortly, coming up in the month of December. I should also point out that Seattle Rep's Public Works putting on a show with selections from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night on December 10th. They're doing it virtually there, but taking donations too. If you feel like supporting them, check it out. It's definitely a worthwhile cause, and Seattle Rep puts on some great productions. All right, we're going to move on to Now Hear This. All right, here we go. Once again, Into the Breach. This is the part of the show where we play a soundbite from the past week, pull apart some of the issues involved. An extra long one coming your way this time around. Definitely worth a listen here. This is Councilmember Deborah Juarez from District 5 commenting on some last-minute cuts to the council's budget regarding Seattle police, and really the nationwide argument often characterized as defund the police. Here's what she said.
Defund the police by 50% was a slogan, and it was an empty and misleading slogan. It caused damage, it caused pain, it caused trauma, it caused anger. But I understand the aspirational, emotional feeling of why some of my colleagues felt the need to do that. And I've done that before. And so I'm saying moving forward, can we start using the words about how we change, not how we fight? Can we start using the language that we see each other, that it isn't about calling out people, about saving face? Can we start to see the humanity in each other, in our city, in our country, and start healing?
And Kevin, I picked that one out because you flagged it on Seattle City Council Insight. Before we get into the details of what the council changed in the budget with police here, what struck you about what Councilmember Juarez said?
Yeah, so, I posted up, I basically took, an hour and transcribed the entire thing and,
well done.
And posted it up because I think everybody sort of needs to read it, and I've got, video clip of the full 5 minutes sort of there. The SPD budget and the larger issues around the 2021 budget have been pretty heated at times. And there's been a lot of rhetoric, and there's been a lot of lobbying by advocacy organizations, on both sides around what to do with SPD.
Yeah.
And, I think Councilmember Juarez was really arguing and said, look, this is a divisive time in the country, and it's turned into a very divisive time in the city.
Yeah.
And that can't be the way we go forward.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We actually have to find a way to come together on this stuff.
Yeah.
And less yelling and talking and more listening.
Yeah. Well, let's get down to it then in terms of what the council did here. The Friday before, the council was supposed to vote on its final budget here. Some new attrition stats came in for October with the SPD. Originally, it was expected to be 7 officers. Turns out it's 23. So the budget chair, Councilmember Mosqueda, made an amendment to change next year's attrition projection from 89 to 114, thus making SPD net zero, as it were, in 2021, meaning this equal number of hires and departures here. Kevin, I know even a few council members found this a little confusing. What do you think of this proposal, which, by the way, the council did approve with an 8-1 vote? Councilmember Peterson, the lone no vote on this. Your thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, well, so I mean, let's put this in larger context. What had happened, just a couple of days before that Friday, where they got the new attrition numbers, was they had passed a budget which, set a funded headcount for SPD and what would be lower than where they started this year.
Right.
But it allowed. There was no hiring freeze, so SPD would be allowed to hire back for for further attrition that they had.
Yep.
And in fact, given their project, and this is kind of an interesting thing with SPD, their hiring pipeline is about a year.
Right. Takes long to get them through the academy, get them on the force. Yeah.
Yeah, they do testing, run them through a whole battery of tests.
Yeah.
They have to go through trainings, just like all these things that happen. It takes about a year. So, the outcome of that is this year they know how many people they're going to be able to hire next year because they know how many people they have in the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
And so they predict about 114 hires next year.
Right.
And they originally were predicting about 89 departures.
Right.
Year. So they would sort of have a net gain. And so, advocates for police reform and abolishing the police and all that said, hey, wait a minute, not only are you letting them hire officers in a time where we're trying to reduce the SPD by 50%,
you're growing the department,
net higher, and
and
it's going to be net lower than, like I said, than where they started this year.
Yeah, but
it's still going to be potentially a little bit higher than where they end this year.
Right.
And so, and the council for a couple of days there took an enormous amount of heat for that.
Yeah. Right.
So then magically, they got a gift from heaven of a new attrition report for October that said, hey, attrition's a little higher.
Right.
And the budget chair, Councilmember Mosqueda, said, well, okay, let's adjust the attrition projection.
Recover those.
And I'm not like, okay. Oh, how about 114?
Right.
And Councilmember Herbold, called her out for this and said, look, that's just a little too cute.
Yeah.
Setting the attrition rate for next year to be exactly the same as the expected hiring rate.
Right.
I mean, they don't know that it's not her.
No. And I was going to say,
they're making up a number. Right.
Yeah. How accurate are these attrition numbers anyhow? I mean, we're trying to look ahead with this. I know the SPD is too. I know the mayor has said that the SPD is really ramping up recruiting right now to try to get some more officers in because they're losing so many officers right now. Yeah. How accurate are these numbers? That's a tough part of this.
Nobody has any idea.
Yeah.
I mean, they certainly, there was no way they could predict that, at the beginning of this year, right? When COVID hit, their attrition went to zero.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of people were concerned about their jobs and wanted to hang on to them.
Many, many years that SPD was essentially fully staffed.
Yeah.
They'd been trying to do that for years, and but attrition went to zero, and their hiring kept going, and then the summer happened, and SPD arguably made it worse with their reaction to the protests, and then they had massive pushback, and then in September and October they had super high attrition.
Yeah,
right.
And I wonder what happens with the rest of the year too. I mean, still got November and December.
December, and I mean, really, it's anybody's guess what happens with attrition next year.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure I jumped in on. We'll get fully in the weeds here, Kevin. The council already has this proviso in place. It was in the budget that was in place before the amendment here to hold back $5 million of SPD's staffing budget, with the assumption that attrition will be higher. I know Councilmember Herbold asked on this one if this other cut, this amendment cut, is going to kind of be a double dip. Your thoughts on this one? Help us sort that piece out.
Yeah. So there's two parts to this.
Yeah.
One is, okay, well, attrition for October came in higher, right?
Yep.
So 16 higher, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you reduce it by 16, and actually Mosqueda's last minute amendment to sort of rejigger everything, reduce it by about 14.
Yeah.
But if you take that and you kind of annualize it, it would save about $2.3 million next year.
Yes. Right.
Right. And then if there's more attrition,
yes.
Right? So they reset it to 114. If attrition for next year comes in higher than 114, and it could, and there would be even more savings from attrition for that.
Yeah.
So there is a way to kind of squint and look at this and say, yeah, I mean, you could have those two things really sort of account for different things.
Yeah.
But I mean, Herbold is basically right that in the way both of those things were written, they were essentially double counting.
Yeah. Man, well, we'll see what happens with that in terms of the attrition numbers. There's a lot still ahead there. But speaking of provisos, and we definitely were, I wanted to touch on something that Erica C. Barnett, one of our accomplices in crime, I guess, when you talk about city reporting here, provisos, a ton of these, Erica pointed out in the budget here from the city council. She points out that over the years, the council has put these in place in the budget, about 19 of them with Mayor McGinn at one point, 15 with Mayor Murray, 17 in Mayor Durkin's first year in office. But this year, setting a record, her research indicates, 42 provisos restricting $117 million. Kevin, I wanted to touch on this because I think it's an interesting side story underneath the budget here. What message is the council trying to send here? Does this indicate a continued kind of frosty relationship between the council and the mayor, as Erica would say?
I think there's a part of that. I think, and particularly around key areas like homelessness, where they've had a big fight over the navigation team and exactly what all year they've been having a fight over, removing encampments and when what's the definition of an obstruction or a hazard encampment, and who's doing this, and how many of them are doing, and the council, is throwing a bunch of provisos, and he started this over the summer too, just to say, you may do this, you may not do that, and around SPD. Right?
Yeah,
to make sure that the SPD doesn't get squirrely with their budget and try to spend more money on overtime or the things that they're shifting position. They can definitely shift positions around, but can they shift other money around with that?
Right.
So a lot of provisos around that. Yeah. But there's a larger issue here, which is, and I'm going to harsh on the council a bit here. This is a council that really likes to micromanage the executive branch, right? Yeah. And doesn't necessarily have a ton of respect for separation of powers across the different branches of government. Right? They really, particularly look at, just, and it came up in the context of SPD and a potential hiring freeze, right? It's not at all clear that the legislative branch, with the city council, has the power to impose a hiring freeze on the executive branch. Right. They get to, they get to set the budget. They get to say how much money they have and the maximum number of people that they can have. Yeah. But there are limits to their ability to tell the executive branch, okay, now that you have that money,
now you got to spend it this way.
Here's how you can run the organization. Right? There are things that they can go a certain distance with and provide service, but there are limits to that. Yeah. So this city council likes pushing those limits. Yeah. And like I said, basically micromanaging the executive branch.
And I was going to say another piece to this that I thought was very important. It's just a $150,000 line item here, but the council's setting up a new independent economics and forecasting office, really trying to change this dynamic of the city budget office that we have here, this traditional, agency that's answered only to the mayor here. So this move by the council here to get their own budget forecasting here, that feels like another tinkering there as well. Kevin, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. And, this is one where, to me, it kind of feels a little bit like some of Trump's election challenges here. It's like they're making allegations that the economic forecasting office, within the city budget office is basically spinning things to the mayor's advantage.
I see.
And the city budget office as a whole, as they present the budget, is very much speaking on behalf of the mayor and the mayor's office.
Yes, right? That's right.
But the economic forecasting office, as part of that, has never really done that. I've never gotten any sense that they're trying to spin this or really present the mayor's point of view on. They've been, they're pretty above board and straightforward and transparent about what they're doing. Right. But their allegation, Councilmember Gonzalez's one has really been pushing for this, or Council President Gonzalez.
Yes, that's it.
And I have yet to see any evidence and she hasn't really presented any evidence that the economic forecasting group there has really been spinning things.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
And there may be a slightly more valid part just around transparency and access.
Right.
To that
and who gets, because King County has an independent office. The state has one set up like that.
So, this isn't bad.
No.
I don't think it's necessarily going to improve anything.
Yeah.
Right. And this change isn't really evidence-based. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, it's probably not going to hurt anything.
Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully it will lead to some more transparency. We can see a little bit more about how the budget's put together. I know Councilmember Mosqueda was talking a lot about that during this budget session here. Okay. We're going to move on to our final segment. What's next? Okay, Kevin, what is next for the city? We're talking about a few different things here, I think. Some of the big overarching issues here. A participatory budgeting process that starts off with this Black Brilliance Research Project from King County Equity Now. And then you've also got the mayor's task force focusing on communities of color. The concern I had, and we talked about this on the podcast months ago, it was kind of this idea of, wait a minute, do we have two groups doing the same thing? And I don't know if that's really gone away at this point. I wanted to talk about this. What comes next when it comes to figuring out how the city's going to invest in BIPOC communities? And do we have two processes going on at one time?
And the answer is yes. We absolutely have two processes going. And in writing the 2021 budget, the city council put in a little bit of verbiage there as a proviso on the mayor's equitable communities initiative and a task force saying that that they really want and expect the recommendations to come from the task force to align with what the participatory budgeting process comes up with. But then you get into interesting timing issues about that, and who finishes first and all that. So that's going to be complicated. But each has got about $30 million right now. And
that's right.
So I got a copy of the contract that the city signed with King County Equity Now around the Black Brilliance Research Project. And they're expecting to finish up their work, which would sort of get them some preliminary ideas about what the big priority areas are and some recommendations on how to run a participatory budgeting process by the end of the first quarter.
Okay.
And then, it doesn't seem like King County Equity Now is signed up to actually run that participatory budgeting process.
I see.
I'm not sure the city council at this point knows who would run it.
I see. Okay.
But so that's kind of outstanding. And then just the task force and when it'll finish. The task force so far has been pretty opaque. I've been trying over and over again to get the mayor's office to give more details about what they're doing. They haven't really been good. They have been meeting every couple of weeks, but they're not really posting minutes of their meetings, and their meetings aren't open. So I keep pushing that, trying to figure out like what's really going on with this group. I have heard reports in their meetings. They've said, "Hey, we really need to go talk to the Black Brilliance Research Project."
Right. You would hope.
Like just get on the same page on this stuff. But there's just little information at this point coming out about what that task force is really doing. So hopefully we'll get some more transparency out of that.
I'm hoping so too. I know the council was certainly talking about that at the end of its budget process. They're trying to make sure that these two pieces were working together. So a work in progress there for certain. All right. Well, we like to wrap up our podcast with some insight on the proper treats to have on your coffee break. Always leaning on Kevin's baking mastery here. And Kevin, I think you've got something nice on the plate there. What's going on?
Yeah. So this is sort of pre-Thanksgiving stuff for me. Got some ginger snaps here.
Oh, that's the good stuff. And the fresh stuff, or what's the ginger that you use there?
Oh, so this recipe actually calls for both. It uses both ground ginger they buy, in a little jar in the store, and freshly grated ginger.
I see.
I guess it's some really interesting complexity to that.
That's cool. May I present to you? This is my daughter's apple cardamom pie here, and it's beautiful lattice work. And I think the biggest challenge is, trying to fit this pie into your mouth for one thing, but this whole concept of cutting the pie and trying to preserve that wonderful lattice work, it just falls apart. You know what I mean? She puts so much great work into this, but I guess that's the joy of it. You eat it. You kind of have to destroy this thing.
A little creative destruction, but then you get to eat it.
That's really good stuff. She actually put a little bit of candied ginger in the mix here, which I thought was an interesting little twist. So ginger all around, and good stuff. And we're blessed to have great food like this. I know both of us are. So it's important to reflect on that this time of year, certainly. And as always, Kevin, thankful to you for joining in on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. I appreciate it.
And Brian, thanks to you for all the hard work you put in this year on the podcast.
I can't wait to keep it on going. So thank you for that. And everybody, the next time you want to know what's happening in local politics, give us a listen on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Find out what's brewing. You can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. And please do support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We need your help to keep this thing going. Thank you for listening. Thank you also for watching on Converge Media too. So until next time, we'll see you. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.